When the iconic film star Tony Curtis died in 2010, his children were heartbroken, until the contents of his will revealed the dark truth. Tony Curtis may be best known for dressing up like a woman in Some Like It Hot, but his long career also had turns in westerns, film noir, and epics like Spartacus. But it was his off-screen life where he really turned up the heat with 6 wives, 6 kids, and a boatload of affairs. Break out the eyeliner and witness Tony Curtis's wild ride through Hollywood. Tony Curtis was born Bernard Schwartz in 1925 and raised in a tiny room at the back of his father's tailor shop in the Bronx. It was a hard childhood for the Schwartz family. At one point, Curtis's parents had to send their sons to an orphanage for a month because they had no food to feed their own children. Sadly, things only got worse from there. As you might be able to tell, life was hard for the Curtis family, but Tony's mother had an especially difficult time. She became increasingly deranged as the years went by, with her mental issues manifesting in horrific ways. Curtis says that his mother would often beat him and his siblings. Eventually, it all came to a disturbing climax. After yet another crisis, Curtis's mother was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia, but somehow, not even this marked the end of the Curtis family's unhappiness. Years after his mother went into treatment, Curtis's brother Robert learned that he had inherited his mother's mental illness. He also had schizophrenia and was even institutionalized. Somehow, Tony found a way out of the Bronx and away from his home troubles. When he grew up, Curtis started taking acting classes and driving a truck to make ends meet. Then, a talent agent spotted him and saw his star potential. And in a lucky twist, it just so happened that this talent agent was also the niece of Gone with the Wind producer and Hollywood heavyweight David O. Selznick. Soon enough, Curtis was on his way to becoming a star. Bernard Schwartz moved from the Bronx to Hollywood and immediately changed his name to Anthony Curtis. Selznick got him under contract at Universal, and they gave him small parts in films, as well as fencing and riding lessons. Truthfully, Curtis didn't have much hope that he'd make it big. He was just after a little money and some female attention. Long before he shot Some Like It Hot with screen legend Marilyn Monroe, Curtis and the then unknown star actually dated. Curtis remembers having barbecues and more with Monroe on the beach. However, as we'll see, their relationship wasn't always so cozy. But for the time being, Monroe wasn't the only woman who saw something in Curtis. There were few stars as bright and attractive as Janet Leigh. She famously appeared in the shower scene in Hitchcock's Psycho, and Curtis must have been on cloud 9 when the two started dating. They became the Hollywood it couple and were ready to tie the knot. However, there was one ginormous obstacle blocking their path down the aisle. Curtis was under contract with Universal International, and the execs spent 3 days trying to talk Curtis out of marrying Leigh. They knew that Curtis's appeal lay in his heartthrob status, and actually wanted him to marry his frequent co-star, Piper Laurie, hoping to pitch them as Hollywood's next super couple. Desperate, the studio threatened to send him back to the Bronx as a failure. Curtis and Leigh didn't want to deal with angry execs at Universal International, so in 1951, they secretly ran off to Connecticut and got married. It was a tiny ceremony with Curtis's friend and actor Jerry Lewis as the witness. After the wedding, they returned to Hollywood ready to face the fallout. Instead of ruining his career, his hasty marriage to Janet Leigh immensely helped both of them in Hollywood. Their time together brought out the best in each other, and audiences agreed. They were the toast of the town, well, for the time being. Sadly, soon enough, Curtis's personal demons would turn his promising career into a downward spiral. It was around this time that Curtis booked his most famous role in 1959's Some Like It Hot. It's impossible to overstate the impact that this film had on Curtis's career and Hollywood in general. But on set, things weren't so rosy. The film's star, Marilyn Monroe, was in the middle of a personal breakdown, often refusing to come out of her trailer and dissolving into tormented wails before shooting scenes. Before long, Monroe and Curtis went from amicable exes to stone-cold rivals. When it was time for a kissing scene between Monroe and Tony Curtis, he cruelly said that he'd rather be kissing Hitler. Despite the drama on set, Some Like It Hot became an instant, if somewhat controversial classic, and it catapulted Curtis right to the Hollywood A-list. Sadly, by this point, Curtis's marriage to Lee was on the rocks. One of their issues was that Lee felt superior to Curtis. She thought Curtis lacked manners and was reportedly furious when Curtis broke a glass in front of actor Ethel Merman. But there were far worse problems in their marriage. Tony Curtis had a reputation for being a legendary player. Curtis would hang out at the Playboy Mansion. He was rumored to have a brief fling with the screen beauty Natalie Wood, and outright admitted that he was in love with his co-star Gloria DeHaven, all while he was still married to Janet Leigh. But somehow the final straw came when Curtis did something even worse than his constant cheating. Being married to a beautiful Hollywood star like Leigh led Curtis to become extremely paranoid. He was always sure she was cheating on him. He would call her over and over again to check up on her. At one point, he was sure she was having an affair with his good friend, Frank Sinatra, which she wasn't. Well, at least not yet. Perhaps because of Curtis's paranoid jealousy, Leigh and Sinatra did actually end up together. But would it have happened if Curtis wasn't always insisting that they were sneaking around behind his back? Likely we'll never know, but it's certain that Curtis's obsessive behavior didn't help his deteriorating marriage to Leigh. In the end, they divorced in 1962. While his marriage to Leigh was falling apart, Curtis stayed busy by starring in the Swords and Sandals epic Spartacus. Like his other hit film, Some Like It Hot, this picture also came with a ton of backstage drama. Spartacus raised eyebrows for an extremely risque scene where Laurence Olivier and Tony Curtis's characters heavily imply that they're attracted to each other. The producers of Spartacus were so sure that censors would cut this scandalous scene that they decided they weren't even going to bother filming it in the first place. Curtis and Olivier, however, had other ideas. They fought to keep the clip in the movie. To keep the actors happy, the studio shot the scene but were so certain they wouldn't use it that they didn't even bother recording the sound. When the film came out, surprise, surprise, the scene was nowhere to be found. Curtis didn't waste any time after divorcing Janet Leigh. The following year, he hooked up with his Taras Bulba co-star Christine Kaufman. Curtis was 38, and Kaufman was just 17 years old. The movie-going public fell out of love with Curtis after he divorced Janet Leigh, and his new marriage to a teenager certainly didn't help. With screen goddess Leigh, he'd been Hollywood's sweetheart, but with Kaufman, he just looked like a creepy old dude with a much younger wife. Throughout the 1960s, Curtis starred in a great number of comedies that mostly didn't perform well at all. One thing was clear: Curtis was no longer viable as the leading man in romantic comedy movies. The problem was that he'd more or less left drama behind and was relying solely on the lighter films. Curtis saw the writing on the wall and made a drastic move. He said goodbye to comedies and took on a very disturbing role. While critics had problems with the Boston Stranglers' subject matter, they praised Curtis's performance as the infamous serial killer in the 1968 film. Curtis was back on his feet again and doing better more substantial work. His real life, however, was about to go to a dark place. After Kaufman, Curtis wed Leslie Allen, who was also 20 years his junior, and just to keep the classy vibe going, he did so mere days after divorcing his previous wife. Once Curtis had divorced Kaufman, she hightailed it back to Germany with their 2 kids, Alexandra and Allegra. Curtis wasn't completely on board with living on a different continent than his kids, so he snatched them from Kaufman and brought them back to the U.S. without her permission. Surprisingly, Kaufman let Curtis keep the kids, at least until things took a turn for the worse. Curtis played father to his young daughters for a few years until Kaufman heard rumors that things weren't going well for her troubled ex-husband. Apparently, Curtis and his new wife weren't exactly creating a kid-friendly environment at home. Curtis had fallen headlong into drug addiction, and his new wife was a heavy drinker. Tony Curtis had gone from Hollywood's most desirable heartthrob to a washed-up actor with a serious addiction. He slummed it in low-budget made-for-TV movies during the day, then self-medicated with pills and booze to numb his pain at night. Eventually, word got around, leading Kaufman to step in. She asked Curtis to send their daughters back to her so that he could clean up his life. After losing his kids to his ex-wife, Curtis tried to turn things around. He divorced Allen and went into rehab. Well, Hollywood rehab. Curtis checked himself into the famous Betty Ford Treatment Center for the rich and famous, and he took it very seriously. He quit cold turkey. But the now sober Curtis still had one addiction left: marriage. Curtis was sober and looking for love again, and he found it with actress Andrea Savio. During their romance, she was just 21 years old, while Curtis was 59. Soon enough, though, he was through with Savio and seemed to have had it with young starlets. He moved on to a lawyer. Surely things would work out better if his spouse wasn't in show business, right? Wrong. Curtis's marriage to lawyer Lisa Deutsch lasted only 18 months. Around the time of his 5th divorce, the now enormous Curtis clan suffered a devastating loss. Curtis's son, Nicholas Allen, lost his life to drugs. At the time of his passing, the young man was just 23 years old. Curtis said it was a terrible thing when a father loses his son, and he regarded the loss as the greatest sadness of his life. He had some dark moments with his other children, too. His daughter, Halloween actress Jamie Lee Curtis, recently revealed the dark secret she shared with her father. While opening up about her past addiction problems, Curtis confessed that she'd once shared illegal substances with her dad. It took over a decade, but happily, Jamie Lee Curtis also managed to get sober. Curtis's 6th wife was 46 years younger than him, which made her just a little over half his daughter Jamie Lee's age. Jill Vandenberg had been a lingerie model. Then she took up horse riding. In fact, Curtis and her opened a refuge for abused and neglected horses. But that doesn't mean he was through with acting. He was also about to reveal some shocking secrets about his dearly departed flame, Marilyn Monroe. In his 2009 book, The Making of Some Like It Hot, Curtis made a bombshell confession. He claimed that he and Monroe had an on-set affair while making the film. According to Curtis, they kept the relationship secret for 2 reasons. First, both he and Monroe were married to other people at the time, but the second reason came out only when Monroe confessed the affair to her then-husband, playwright Arthur Miller. Curtis claims that when he and Monroe told Miller about their affair, Monroe also revealed that she had become pregnant with Curtis's baby. In the end, though, Monroe miscarried the child. Sadly, that wasn't unusual for the actress. Tragically, she always wanted children but could never carry a baby to term. When Curtis's book about Monroe came out, not everyone was sure they believed the dramatic tale. After all, Curtis had given so many different versions of his relationship with Monroe over the years. They were feuding co-stars, young lovers, and now players in a torrid affair. At least one outlet claimed that the tale was unlikely. In the early 2000s, Curtis shifted his focus from acting in films to painting. Curtis had been painting for many years, but the public was now starting to take notice. The Metropolitan Museum of Art ended up displaying his painting, The Red Table. But this multi-talented artist wasn't about to say goodbye to film just yet. Remember that Spartacus scene where Curtis's character gives Laurence Olivier a bath? Well, after 4 long decades of bugging the studio to put the scene in a cut of the movie, Curtis finally prevailed. He re-recorded audio for his character, while Anthony Hopkins filled in for Olivier, who'd sadly passed by this point. The scene is now a landmark part of queer cinema history. Many people have wondered if Curtis ever pursued romances with men. After all, he dressed as a woman in Some Like It Hot, and took a bath with a guy in Spartacus. But Curtis reportedly confirmed that he was straight. He loved his brothers and sisters who were gay, but he just wasn't one of them. Women all over lost their minds for Tony Curtis, probably because he was so refreshingly different from other heartthrobs. He had full lips, soft blue eyes, and he even plucked his eyebrows. It was a new, feminized version of male beauty, and then there was his iconic ducktail hairstyle. The hairdo actually inspired a cinema usher to get the same haircut for himself. That usher was Elvis Presley, and when he got famous, he made Curtis's do part of his signature style. In Curtis's final film, David and Fatima, Curtis played a character named Schwartz, which was his real surname back in the Bronx. After all the heat he took for his working-class roots, it seemed fitting that he got to use his old name again. And he couldn't have taken the role a moment too soon. You see, Curtis didn't have much time left. Evidently, Curtis knew that the end was near, and he had one final heartbreaking request. When a photographer visited his home to take some portraits of the elderly film star, Curtis asked the man, "I'm not in a good way at the moment, but can I ask you one thing? Can you make me look like an icon just one more time?" Just 2 years later, the 85-year-old actor passed away. However, if you think that death itself could stop Tony Curtis from causing drama, you'd be wrong. Curtis had always told his wives and children that there would be money for them all in the end. But when the end came, they were in for the shock of their lives. In his last will, Curtis acknowledged the existence of his children, but left his $60 million estate to his current wife, Jill Vandenberg. The children contested, but Vandenberg walked away with everything. There's a lot of speculation that Vandenberg pulled a fast one in order to get the money from Curtis and away from his horde of wives and children. He had changed his will quite suddenly just 6 months before he passed. But there's also proof that Curtis had finally found happiness in his 6th marriage. He said that he didn't want anyone in his life besides her. Maybe this was his way of rewarding her for sticking with him. Or maybe not. In 2008, when he was still very much married to Vandenberg, he gave an interview claiming that the true love of his life wasn't actually his wife, but his old co-star, Gloria DeHaven. Many years after Curtis's passing, a startling accusation came to light. Kim Novak, star of the films Picnic and Vertigo, alleged that Curtis had spiked her drink back in 1958. She was at a party and swears she only had one drink provided by Curtis. The next morning she woke up wearing nothing and lying in her own bed. She alleges she didn't remember anything about what happened that night. Tony Curtis's heartthrob status was undeniable, yet his tumultuous love life and destructive behavior often overshadowed his cinematic achievements. Despite these challenges, his performances in iconic mid-century films remain a testament to his enduring legacy in Hollywood. His journey from a poor Bronx boy to a Hollywood legend shows both the possibilities and the dark realities of fame. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more fascinating content.